Hello. Now we'll discuss about higher order functions. So the functions which is map, filter, these type of functions are called higher order functions. So as in definition, we can say that a function that takes a function as an argument or return a functions as its value. So that's the higher order functions. So either a function can take the argument as a function or it return a function as its return value. In both situations, right, those are called the higher order functions, right? For example, sorted function is the higher order functions, right, that we have already discussed. Now first we'll talk about the map function, which is built-in functions that apply a functions to the iterable object. Now before we start using the map function, let's try to check the help or the documentation of the map function. With the help we can check the documentation. Here we can see that. Now this is the documentation of the map function. Here we have seen the how do we call it. So we have to call the map. The first argument should be the function and the second argument should be the iterable, right? So it takes two argument function and the second argument takes as an iterables, right? Now here let's create a function of factorial, right? So here we have created a function of factorial which takes the n argument and then it calculate the factorial of the value. Let's run this. And now let's try to execute this function. Here we are trying to check the factorial of 3. We are trying to check the factorial of 4. Now, we know that this is a factorial function. So let's try to use this function as a map function. So in the map function, we are passing the first argument as a factorial because this is what the documentation says. First argument should be the this function. In the second argument here, we have this iterable. So what this does is it takes each object of the iterable and try to pass each value as an argument. So map function will take each value from the iterable and pass as an argument to these functions and then execute the functions and gives the output. So let's try to run this. Here as in return value we are getting the map object, right? So this map function returns the map object and this map object is an iterable object. So because this is an iterable, you can either take this in a loop or you can convert this to a list. Now let's convert the output to a list. Here we have passed this map function directly with the list and now we can get the exact list output. Here we have this. So factorial of 1 is 1, 2 is 2, 3 is 6, 4 is 24 and 5 is 120, right? We can also use this way. Here we have this two list L1 and L2. Now here we are getting another functions. So we have this lambda function which takes two parameter x and the y and return x plus y. So we have this one function and two iterable object. Now we can pass both iterable object as a map function over here, and because this function takes two arguments simultaneously, so this will take each element from L1 and L2 as an x and y as an argument, and then it will return x plus y. So here is the result for that. Now let's talk about the filter functions. Again, to understand the filter function, let's try to check the help of the filter function. Here it says that again the same as that. It takes function or none and the second argument is the iterable object. So it can take the none as a first argument. Let's try to run this. Again, this filter function is a function that filters the iterable based on the truthiness of the element. That means we check that whether this particular object is true or not, or the output of the particular object is true or not, right? And then based on that, it will filter out those objects only if the values are true, right? Again, here consider this example. Here we have this list. We have the value between 0 and 6. Now we know that the truthiness of the 0 is false because the boolean value of the 0 is false, but all the value 1 2 3 4 5 6, all the 6 element belongs to true. So here what we're trying to do is We again, this filter will also return you the object, right? So either you can take this in a loop or you can convert this to a list, right? So here we are taking the output of the filter to a list, to a for loop. We are saying for e in, and then we are passing the filter object, and then we are printing e. As the first argument, understand that. So the first argument as an we are passing as none, and the second argument as list. So what this filter will do is this will try to pass each value and try to check with the none object, right? Like if each value belonging to the, like each value can be compared with the none over here, or the truthness value is false, so that value will be filtered out and the remaining value will be returned. Let's try to check that. Here we are saying that, so the output is 1 to 6. 0 is eliminated because 0 is false. We can even use a function for this filter, right? Suppose we want to filter out all the odd value, only retry the even value. You can do this. So here, again, you should always remember that the function, whatever we are creating, that should return either true and false. So whenever it takes the argument, whatever it does with the argument, it should return true and false. So here we have defined the function called is even. It takes n and try to check whether this n is divisible by 2 or not, right? Or here we are trying to check that whether the remainder of n is 0 or not. If it is, then it will be true. That means the value is even, otherwise it is false. Now let's try to run this function. Here we have defined it. Now here we are using that same function. We are saying filter is even, and then we are passing L. Again, we have converted this result to a list so that we can see the result. So what this will do is this will pass 1 to the isEven function and try to check whether, and try to get the output, whether the output is true and false. Same as for 2, same as for 3, 4, and so on, right? So if the values return the true, then that value will be printed or that value will be returned, right? Let's try to run this. Here we can see that 2, 4, 6, 8, both, all the 4 are even, and we are getting the result. All the odd has been filtered out. We can also use the lambda function over here instead of functions. So here we are using lambda x. So here we're passing the x as an argument, and then we are trying to check the remainder is 0 or not. Again, we'll get the same result. We also have the different alternative to map and the filter. We can do the list comprehension. We'll talk about the list comprehension and the map and filter later on in the class more. But let's try to see the basics of list comprehensions. Here, what we're trying to do is, we have this list value. The value is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now we are passing this, now we are iterating each value in the list, right? And then trying to check that. And then each value is being passed to the factorial functions. And then the entire value is stored in a list. So this technique is called the list comprehensions. So we are executing the code and storing the code in the list itself. That's the list comprehension. Here we're getting the result. You do not have to use a separate line of code, right? Now let's talk about the two iterable examples. So zip is also a built-in function which takes two, like one or more iterable object or two or more iterable object, right? And generate a tuple where each tuple contains one element from each element, or one element from each iterable object. For example, you can say that here we have this two list L1 and L2. L1 has number 1, 2, 3. L2 is A, B, C. Now if I do the zip L1 and L2, what this will do is this will take the 1 and A, 2 and B, 3 and C, and combine all these 1 and A to the tuple, 2 and B to the tuple, 3 and C to the tuple. So it will bind those as a pair. Here you can see that. We can also do the zip with the 3 element. We'll get the same result. Now here, again, you can also use a different element. Like here we have this list, we have the tuple, and then we have the string. We can apply the different type of iterable object. This will work. Again, here we have this L1 is the range 100. This means that the value will be 0 to 99. And the L2 is Python, which is this 3 and 3, 6 element. So if I apply the zip of L1 and L2, it will extract 0 from here and P from here, 1 from here and Y from here, till n does not, like till it reaches to the n, or it will only consider the length of lowest list, and it will only create that many value only. So the rest of the value will be ignored. Here we can check that, right? Using a zip function, we can now add to our more list element by element. Here we can see that. So here we have this two lists, L1 and L2. Now we are zipping those two lists, L1 and L2, because this zip returns the iterable object, right? So, and again, each object has a tuple. So by the loop, you can extract each tuple element. So here we are saying that for I comma j in zip this, that means I will hold the first element and j will hold the second element of the tuple, and then we are adding those elements. So we can even mix these things, right? We can also use filter. We can also do filter using list comprehension, like over here. Here we have this list 1 to 9. Now we are saying that for I and L, if I modulo 2 equal to 0, then we have to store the I into the list. So this is the first line of code for loop. Inside the for loop, this is the code which is filtering out the value. And then now if the value gets true, so we have to store that value. So here we are storing that value I to the list, and entire thing is happening inside a list because we wanted to add in a list. So here we're getting the output, right? We can also combine map and the filter, like over here. First, we have the map function, which is trying to execute the function and passing each value. And then this value, and so here we are getting the iterable object, and then we are passing to the lambda function, which is filtering out the value, right? So here we have combined the list and the filter, the map and the filter. We can also use the list comprehension to do the same step, right? So there are various ways we can solve the problems, right? And this is it, all about higher order functions. Again, this type of function either takes the function as an argument or return the function as a value. Right? Thank you very much.